Have you noticed how bizarre the internet has become lately when it comes to jawlines? You scroll through any short-form video platform, and suddenly you are bombarded with teenagers intensely chewing on rubber blocks, analyzing the exact angle of their cheekbones, and talking about their faces like they are modifying a sports car. It is completely surreal. We are looking at a hyperfixation on physical appearance that feels entirely unprecedented, at least in how clinical and calculated it has become.
It really is a fascinating and somewhat dystopian phenomenon. What you are seeing is the explosion of a trend called looks-maxing. It started in the dark, niche corners of internet forums and has now completely infiltrated mainstream youth culture, especially among young men. If we were to treat this like a corporate phenomenon or a geopolitical movement and run a full intelligence report on it, the sheer scale of the psychological and economic impact would be staggering. We are essentially watching an entire generation gamify their own genetic makeup.
Gamifying genetics is the perfect way to phrase it. It feels like they are treating the human body as a piece of software that desperately needs an upgrade patch. If we actually break this down using a strategic framework, let us say, the most analysis, looking at the mission, objectives, strategies, and tactics of this community, what is the actual mission driving millions of young men to obsess over their facial symmetry?
The core mission of looks-maxing is brutal but straightforward. To achieve peak physical attractiveness in order to maximize social and romantic capital, it operates on this deeply cynical worldview that your physical appearance is the absolute ceiling of your potential in life. If we look at their objectives, they are incredibly specific. We are not talking about a vague goal like getting in shape. The objectives are measurable metrics. They want a specific body fat percentage, a perfectly defined jawline, a positive canthal tilt, which is the angle of the eyes, and perfect facial symmetry. They have turned aesthetics into a hard science.
That is where it gets incredibly intense. The strategies they use to hit these objectives are fascinating. It is essentially a peer-to-peer surveillance state. The strategy relies on algorithmic consumption of beauty standards, combined with brutal communal feedback. They post pictures of themselves online and ask the community to rate them, to point out their flaws. It is crowdsourced insecurity. And the tactics? That is where we get into the vocabulary of the trend.
Exactly. The tactics are divided into two main camps: soft maxing and hard maxing. Soft maxing includes things that are generally harmless and honestly pretty standard. It is getting a good haircut, establishing a skincare routine, hitting the gym, fixing your posture, and a practice called mewing, which is a tongue posture technique that supposedly sharpens the jawline over time. But hard maxing is where the tactics become extreme. We are talking about using unregulated chemical compounds, steroids, and undergoing invasive cosmetic surgeries like bone implants or jaw realignment just to fit an internet aesthetic.
Which naturally leads us to a broader evaluation of the trend. Let us run a SWOT analysis on this looks-maxing epidemic. Let us start with the strengths. It is easy to demonize the entire movement, but is there actually a silver lining here? Is there a positive takeaway from this hyperfixation?
Surprisingly, yes. The primary strength of the looks-maxing trend is that it is essentially a Trojan horse for self-care and discipline. Historically, young men have not been encouraged to care about skincare, grooming, or even basic hygiene to this degree. Through this trend, you have millions of young men learning about nutrition, the importance of sleep, cardiovascular health, and dermatological care. It is promoting a level of discipline and self-improvement that, when kept in the soft maxing realm, actually does build genuine confidence and healthy habits.
I can see that. It is repackaging traditional self-care into a hyper-masculine video game like Quest so it feels accessible to them, but the weaknesses seem profoundly dangerous. The psychological toll of looking in the mirror and hyper-analyzing the millimeter difference in your eyelids cannot be healthy.
It is a mental health disaster waiting to happen. The biggest weakness is the rampant cultivation of body dysmorphia. When you train your brain to view your face as a collection of isolated flaws that need to be fixed, you lose the ability to see yourself as a whole human being. The standards are biologically impossible for the vast majority of people without surgery. Furthermore, it creates a deeply toxic echo chamber. If someone fails to achieve these impossible standards, the community often pushes a narrative of genetic determinism, the idea that it is over for them, which leads to severe depression and social withdrawal.
And the financial drain must be immense, which pivots perfectly into the opportunities side of our SWOT analysis. Whenever there is deep-seated insecurity, there is a massive market ready to monetize it. The commercial opportunities generated by this trend must be astronomical.
The market boom is unprecedented. We are seeing a massive explosion in the male grooming industry. Skincare brands are pivoting their marketing entirely to capture this demographic. You have a surge in specialized products, jawline exercisers, posture correctors, hair growth serums. Beyond retail, the cosmetic surgery industry is experiencing a massive influx of younger male patients. Procedures that were once incredibly rare for young men, like jaw fillers, buccal fat removal, and hair transplants, are becoming normalized. There is also a massive opportunity for mental health professionals and fitness coaches to step in and offer healthy, balanced alternatives to the extreme advice found on these forums.
But that monetization also fuels the threats, which is the final piece of our analysis. When an industry profits from an insecurity, it has a vested interest in keeping that insecurity alive. What are the major threats here, not just to the individuals, but to society at large?
The most immediate threat is physical harm. You have teenagers attempting dangerous DIY procedures. There is a horrific practice called bone smashing, where individuals literally hit their own faces with blunt objects, believing the microfractures will heal and create a more chiseled bone structure. It is medically catastrophic. But the broader, perhaps more insidious threat is algorithmic radicalization.
Right, because the algorithm does not just feed you skincare tips, it feeds you a worldview.
Precisely. The pipeline from self-improvement to extreme toxic ideologies is incredibly short. A young man starts by looking for advice on how to clear his acne, and the algorithm slowly feeds him content about how society is biologically rigged against him, how his skull shape dictates his social worth, and eventually, it pushes deeply misogynistic or nihilistic content. The threat is the creation of a generation of young men who are deeply alienated, obsessed with superficial metrics, and entirely disconnected from genuine human empathy and connection.
That is a terrifying thought. It makes you wonder about the philosophical implications of all this. We are living in an era where everything is optimized. We optimize our work schedules, our sleep cycles, our diets. It was only a matter of time before we turned that ruthless optimization inward, onto our own faces. But when you reduce a human being to a collection of angles and percentages, you strip away the very essence of humanity. Charm, charisma, kindness, humor, none of these can be measured with a protractor.
That is the ultimate tragedy of the looks-maxing trend. It operates on the illusion of control. In a world that feels increasingly chaotic and unpredictable, where economic and social stability feel out of reach for many young people, controlling the exact angle of your jawline feels like a tangible victory. It is a coping mechanism for modern alienation. But it is a trap. You can spend tens of thousands of dollars. You can spend years in the gym. You can undergo surgery. But if the core issue is a fundamental lack of self-worth, no amount of facial symmetry will ever make you feel whole.
It is the myth of the horizon. You keep walking toward it, but it always recedes. As we wrap up this intelligence report on the looks-maxing phenomenon, it is clear that we are dealing with something far more complex than just a vanity trend. It is a profound reflection of modern anxiety, driven by algorithms, monetized by industries, and paid for with the mental health of a generation.
It absolutely is. The intersection of technology, biology, and commerce has created a perfect storm. While the push for better health and hygiene is a welcome byproduct, the sheer psychological weight of these impossible standards is a heavy price to pay. The challenge moving forward will be how society, parents, and perhaps even regulators address the algorithmic amplification of body dysmorphia before it becomes a standard rite of passage for youth.
A challenge that will define the next decade of digital culture. It leaves us with a critical question to ponder. If we eventually reach a point where technology and surgery allow everyone to look mathematically perfect, what happens to the value of beauty? When perfection becomes the baseline, perhaps we will finally realize that our imperfections were the very things that made us beautiful in the first place.